I'm Clara, 32, and my entire life was forever changed at my father's retirement dinner last spring. The air in the banquet hall at the Hawthorne, Boston's most exclusive restaurant, was thick with the scent of money, power, and the self-satisfaction of the financial elite. Giant crystal chandeliers glittered with a warm golden light, casting their glow on a crowd of banking's most influential figures, people I'd seen on the covers of business magazines and on financial news channels. The clinking of glasses echoed through the vast room, not a toast to a peaceful end, but to a powerful legacy being passed on. It was a grand celebration for Charles Kingston, my father, a commanding banking executive who had dedicated 4 decades to his empire. He stood there, his silver hair meticulously styled, his face stern yet radiating confidence as he raised his crystal glass high. His gaze swept across the crowd, filled with self-importance like a king surveying his subjects. "My real children are the ones who made me proud," he declared, his voice resounding with confident authority, emphasizing each word, each syllable, as if it were a final judgment for anyone who didn't measure up. A burst of applause erupted, the cheers echoing through the room like a preordained ritual, a definitive affirmation of an unyielding journey of success. My chest tightened. A familiar, chilling sensation, colder than any champagne. For 32 years I had lived under the harsh shadow of such declarations, these invisible metrics that always left me feeling inadequate. My heart clung to a fragile, naive glimmer of hope. Perhaps now that he was retiring, now that the pressure of work no longer weighed him down, things would be different. Perhaps tonight, in this moment of reflecting on his illustrious career, he would finally see me, his daughter who had always yearned for a flicker of approval, a single nod of acknowledgement. But then, his cold, emotionless gaze swept across the opulent room, cutting straight through the glittering crowd, and found me on the other side. We stood facing each other, the distance between our tables, a chasm separating 2 worlds, 2 definitions of success. A sudden silence fell, so profound I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart in my chest, pounding like an alarm. "You can leave," he said, his voice neither loud nor soft, neither angry nor impassioned, but chillingly clear and distinct, loud enough for everyone in the now silent room to hear. A murmur began to ripple through the crowd, curious, judgmental eyes turning toward me, like needles piercing my skin. My face burned, humiliation scorching me like potent acid. I felt like a cornered animal, no escape, the eyes of others like headlights blinding me, illuminating my raw vulnerability. All my life, I had grown accustomed to my father's criticisms, his disappointed glances. But this was the first time he had publicly disowned me, in front of everyone who mattered to him. Those he valued more than his own flesh and blood. My legs trembled, weak as if they might give way, but I slowly pushed back my chair and stood, each movement a desperate internal struggle, trying to cling to the last shred of my dignity, the last residue of self-respect, before it was utterly crushed. Amidst the dizzying pain and overwhelming shame, I heard another sound, the scrape of a chair beside mine, louder, more decisive than my own. I looked up, my vision still blurred by unshed tears. Right beside me, Ethan, my husband, had also risen. His tall, steady figure stood firm. His face, usually gentle and warm, with deep gray-blue eyes, was now taut, his gaze holding not embarrassment or discomfort, but a quiet, burning fury, a flame I had never seen in him before. The entire room fell into an absolute silence, waiting. Something had changed. The moment Ethan stood up that night changed everything. What happened next redefined the very concept of family for me forever. I knew from that instant my life would never be the same. I grew up in Brooklyn, an affluent Boston suburb where success wasn't celebrated, it was merely expected. Our colonial-style home, with its meticulously manicured lawn and pristine white picket fence, looked picture-perfect from the outside, like an advertisement. It was an immaculate facade, a gleaming shell that hid the truth within. But inside, it was a different story. A narrative where perfection was a fragile veneer over coldness and relentless demands. My father, Charles Kingston, wasn't just a powerful banking executive, a titan of Wall Street. He was a workaholic, a man who measured love, achievements, and even disappointments by financial metrics, by grand deals and prestigious university names. He viewed life as a dry balance sheet, and I often found myself in the debt column rather than assets, a burden needing improvement. He believed everything had to have practical, measurable value, and anything that didn't fit that definition was useless. My mother, Eleanor, was a beautiful, gentle, and quiet woman. She was the only one who brought a fragile warmth to that house, a faint light in the encroaching gloom, but ultimately she was powerless against my father's domineering presence and endless expectations. She rarely dared to openly defy him, only occasionally whispering comfort to me after Charles's harsh criticisms, words sharp as knives cutting into my nascent soul. I lost her to breast cancer when I was 20, and with her the only shield, the fragile buffer between my father's impossible expectations and my own tenuous reality, completely disappeared. From then on, I was utterly exposed, isolated, directly facing his constant judgment. My siblings were everything I was not. They were the archetypes my father desperately wanted me to be, the shining examples I could never live up to. Marcus, 4 years my senior, was the epitome of a perfect heir. He followed our father into finance, graduated from the prestigious Wharton School, and rapidly climbed the ranks at a top investment firm. He was the golden child, the unwavering pride of our lineage. Victoria, 2 years my senior, was no less accomplished. She became a talented cardiothoracic surgeon, collecting prestigious medical awards like an exclusive collection, a living testament to the perfection my father craved. They were the standard bearers, the ones who made the Kingston name mean something, as my father often declared, his tone full of pride and clearly implying my own deviation. And then there was me. From childhood, I gravitated toward books and art, finding escape in stories when reality became too harsh, when I felt I didn't belong in the world my father had created. I still remember sitting at our glossy black grand piano during my 12th birthday recital. The small living room in our house was packed with family friends and Charles's important high society connections. I was playing Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune, a melodic, dreamy piece, but my fingers trembled over the keys, feeling the pressure of dozens of eyes fixed on me. Halfway through, I hit a wrong note, just one, a tiny, seemingly insignificant mistake to anyone else. But to my father, it was everything. He abruptly stood up, straightened his tie with a decisive tug, and walked straight out of the room, the front door slamming shut behind him, echoing like a final verdict. The room fell silent, everyone looking at me with pity or awkward confusion. I finished the piece, tears blurring my vision. That single moment defined our relationship. One mistake was all it took for my father to deem me unworthy, not good enough. College brought me temporary freedom, a breath of fresh air after years trapped in my father's cold house. I chose to study literature at Amherst College, a bold and rebellious decision despite Charles's insistence that I pursue business or law. "You're throwing your life away on fairy tales and whimsical notions," he'd said when I showed him my acceptance letter, his tone laced with disdain and disappointment. He refused to pay for a degree he considered useless, so I funded my own education through scholarships and a string of part-time jobs, selling books at a cozy old bookstore, tutoring classmates, even working as a barista at a student coffee shop. Those years taught me independence, self-reliance, but they also deepened my internal struggles with anxiety and self-worth. Occasionally achieved things I was proud of, yet my father's voice still echoed in my head, a persistent reminder asking why it wasn't more, why it wasn't something important by his definition. This self-doubt seeped into my personal relationships. I dated occasionally, but they never lasted. I either found myself drawn to men who unconsciously reinforced my father's criticisms, deepening my belief that I wasn't good enough, or I pushed away the good ones before they could discover that I wasn't enough, that I carried invisible scars I didn't want anyone to see. I built an invisible, sturdy wall around myself, fearing intimacy, fearing abandonment and judgment, I lived in a ceaseless loop of self-doubt, feeling like a character in a tragic novel with no escape. I yearned to be seen, to be accepted, yet I constantly sabotaged myself before anyone had the chance to do so. Everything changed abruptly 3 years ago at a small bookstore tucked away on a cobblestone street in Cambridge. I was browsing the classic literature section when I reached for the last copy of a rare edition of Jane Eyre, a book that had given me so much inspiration and strength. At the exact same moment, another hand touched the book. I looked up and saw Ethan Hayes. His eyes were kind and deep like the ocean. His warm smile not only lit up his face but also soothed something within me that I didn't even know I was carrying. "You take it," he insisted, his tone sincere. Anyone hunting for Bronte deserves it more than me. It was the first time I'd heard words that weren't conditional or judgmental. We ended up talking for hours at the coffee shop next door, the cozy space filled with the aroma of coffee and old books. Ethan was a talented software engineer who loved literature almost as much as I did. He listened when I spoke, truly listened, without checking his watch or preparing his next argument. When I mentioned my long-held dream of starting a small publishing house for overlooked authors, the unheard voices, the stories that needed telling, the buried talents, he didn't laugh or call it impractical like my father would. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about my business plan, about my vision, and what I hope to achieve. 6 months later, with Ethan's unwavering encouragement and tireless help with financial projections, I launched Versebound Press. We specialized in literary fiction by diverse voices. By year 2, one of our books, The Unspoken Truth, had won a prestigious regional literary award, and we had expanded to publishing 6 titles annually. It didn't make me rich, but it made me proud. A pure, unadulterated pride. A feeling I had never experienced from my own accomplishments. Ethan and I married in a small, intimate ceremony at the Boston Public Library, surrounded by true friends who genuinely loved and supported us. My father didn't attend, claiming an important business meeting in Chicago. Marcus sent an expensive but impersonal gift, accompanied by a hastily written card. Only Victoria represented my side of the family, but she left immediately after the ceremony for a medical conference, a gesture more formal than affectionate. "They don't deserve you," Ethan whispered as we danced, surrounded by his loving family and friends instead of mine, his words a much-needed balm. For nearly 2 years after that, I rarely spoke to my father, until the invitation to his retirement dinner arrived. "Maybe this is his way of reaching out," I said to Ethan, though I didn't truly believe it, a naive flicker of hope. Maybe things will be different now that he's retiring. I wanted to try one more time, a final chance to finally make him proud, to gain his acceptance. The night of the dinner, I stood before our bedroom mirror in a sophisticated navy blue dress that had cost more than I'd usually spend, a symbolic investment in a fragile hope. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup carefully applied to hide the shadows under my eyes from a week of stress-induced insomnia. "You look beautiful," Ethan said, adjusting his tie beside me in the mirror, his eyes full of love. "I feel like I'm going to throw up," I admitted, a panic attack hitting me just as we were about to leave, my stomach churning. Ethan sat with me on the edge of our bed, patiently coaching me through the breathing exercises my therapist had taught me, his hand making slow circles on my back, reassuring me we could still cancel. But I shook my head. "No," I said, reapplying my lipstick with trembling hands. "I need to do this. I need to try one more time." I had convinced myself this was my last chance to break through the cold wall with my father, for him to finally see my worth. As we drove downtown, my heels clicked against the cobblestone walkway like a countdown to judgment. Inside the opulent banquet hall, I found Marcus, my brother, who offered only a brief, dismissive smile before turning back to boast about the $40 million, 0 cents deal he'd just closed at Blackstone Investment. He introduced me to his colleagues as my little sister, she does something with books, a deliberately condescending remark. Then there was Victoria, my sister, flaunting an enormous diamond engagement ring and talking about lavish medical conferences in Switzerland. She glanced at my dress with subtle assessment, then simply smiled. Navy is so reliable. Even Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, merely whispered, "Try to make him proud tonight. It's important to him." Each interaction was a painful reminder of my place in this family. An outsider, a disappointment. Finally, I approached my father. He saw me coming but continued his conversation until I stood awkwardly at the edge of his circle of accomplished men. "Clara, you made it," he said, his tone lacking any pleasure, merely a reluctant acknowledgement. I offered him my gift, an expensive fountain pen Ethan had helped me choose, but he accepted it without even looking inside. When I tried to mention Versebound Press's achievement, our author shortlisted for the Massachusetts Book Award, he brushed it aside with a dismissive chuckle. Clara always had her head in the clouds, playing with books while her siblings pursued real careers. It was a cold splash of water to the face, but I fought back the tears, retreating before they could fall. Throughout the cocktail hour, I watched my father move through the room like a king holding court, warmly accepting congratulations from everyone, from longtime colleagues to prominent politicians. With each person he greeted warmly, the contrast to his coldness toward me became more pronounced, like a knife twisting in my gut. The lamb was perfectly cooked, the wine exceptional, but everything tasted like ash in my mouth. When it was time to be seated for dinner, I discovered we'd been placed at a table far from the main one where my father, Marcus, Victoria, and other VIPs would sit. An older woman at my table even asked, "You're Charles's daughter? The one who isn't a doctor or banker?" and dismissed Versebound Press as a hobby business, with the same tone one might use to address a child's crayon drawing. After polished speeches from the bank's CEO and Marcus, it was my father's turn. The room quieted. My heart beat faster, a final glimmer of hope. He spoke of my mother, Eleanor, with a touch of emotion, his voice cracking slightly when he mentioned my late wife, Eleanor, making me believe he had truly changed, that retirement had softened him. But then he declared decisively, "A man's true legacy isn't measured in dollars or deals, it's measured in what he leaves behind, in who carries forward his values and vision." He turned to the VIP table, beaming with pride as he lauded Marcus and Victoria, his golden children, who had exceeded every expectation, the achievements he wished to leave behind. And then his gaze swept the room, fixed on me. "My real children are the ones who made me proud." The room erupted in applause. But to me they were physical blows to the chest. "You can leave," he said, his voice ice-cold, perfectly audible in the now silent room. My chest constricted painfully, my vision blurred, as if the world was collapsing around me. My father had just publicly disowned me in front of everyone who mattered to him. Humiliation scorched me, but deep down, a small voice whispered, "Enough." I gripped the edge of the table, fighting to hold on to the last shred of dignity, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. If I had to leave, I would do so with whatever composure I could muster. I stood motionless, feeling as if I was frozen in ultimate shame. Dozens of eyes bored into me, consuming me with their judgment, each gaze like a needle pricking my skin. All my life I had tried to earn a sliver of my father's approval, and in one moment he had made it clear I never would. I gripped the edge of the table, struggling to cling to the last shred of dignity, desperately fighting the urge to run or burst into tears right there. It wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. If I had to leave, I would do so with whatever composure I could muster, even if it was just a fragile facade. Then, a sound that changed everything. The sharp scrape of a chair beside me. Ethan stood, his movement deliberate and unhurried, an astonishing calm amidst the emotional storm. I glanced at him through my haze of humiliation. His face, usually gentle and warm, now showed not embarrassment or awkwardness, but a quiet, fierce fury, a fire I had never seen in him. A confused murmur spread through the room. My father, Charles, his expression darkening, his jaw tightening at this unexpected development. He hadn't anticipated resistance to his decree, certainly not from my husband, whom he'd always viewed as an irrelevant addition, an insignificant detail on his disappointing family tree. "Sit down," my father commanded, his voice full of authority, addressing Ethan directly, perhaps for the first time that evening. "This doesn't concern you." But Ethan didn't sit. Instead, he straightened to his full height, his shoulders back, his gaze resolute, locked with my father's across the room. The tension was palpable, electric. No one moved, no one spoke. The entire room held its breath. And then Ethan did something that would forever divide my life into before and after. He reached for his water glass and spoon with deliberate calm, the soft ping of metal against crystal cutting through the uncomfortable silence. That small sound drawing every eye in the room. It was the universal signal for attention before a toast. My father's face flushed with anger at this breach of protocol. This was his night, his moment, his meticulously orchestrated display of power. Ethan had just challenged that in the most civilized yet unmistakable way. "What do you think you're doing?" my father demanded. But his voice had lost some of its authority, laced with a hint of bewilderment. Ethan ignored him, waiting until the room was completely silent, every guest frozen in anticipation of this unexpected turn. His hand was steady as he set down the spoon, his expression composed but determined. I'd never seen this side of him before. This quiet, immovable strength. "I'd like to make a toast," Ethan began, his voice clear and carrying, "to the woman Charles Kingston failed to see." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My heart hammered against my ribs. For those who don't know me, I'm Ethan Hayes, Clara's husband. And since Charles has shared his perspective tonight, I'd like to share the truth about the daughter he just told to leave. My father stepped forward. "That's enough? Security will escort you out?" "By all means," Ethan replied evenly, "but I wonder how the Boston Globe would report on Charles Kingston having his own daughter and son-in-law forcibly removed from his retirement party. I'm sure your banking colleagues would find that fascinating." My father froze, his gaze darting around the room at his professional peers. His reputation had always been paramount. Ethan had found the one leverage that would work. 3 years ago, Ethan continued, Clara founded Versebound Press with her own savings and a small business loan that she qualified for without any family connections. Last year they published Salt and Stone, which was not only shortlisted for the Massachusetts Book Award, but was just optioned for a film adaptation. Murmurs of interest swept through the crowd. This was news even to me. What Charles failed to mention is that Clara's Press has provided a platform for voices that major publishers overlooked, including veterans, immigrants, and yes, people who grew up in emotionally abusive homes. Their literacy program has put books in the hands of over 3,000 underprivileged children in Boston's poorest neighborhoods. I felt a surreal detachment, as if watching a scene in a movie rather than my own life unfolding. Ethan was publicly defending me, cataloging achievements my father had dismissed or never bothered to learn about, while Marcus was crushing it on Wall Street and Victoria was advancing her medical career. It was Clara who took a leave of absence from college to care for her mother during cancer treatment. It was Clara, who sat by Eleanor's hospital bed, reading her favorite poems when she was too weak to hold a book herself. My throat tightened at that memory. Those quiet hours with my mother had been sacred, painful, precious. "What Charles doesn't know," Ethan continued, his voice taking on an edge, "is that the down payment for Marcus's first New York apartment came from Clara's college fund. She gave it to him when his credit was destroyed after that gambling problem he worked so hard to hide from Daddy." Marcus's face drained of color. That had been our secret, a rare moment of genuine connection between siblings, when he'd come to me desperate and ashamed. I'd helped him because, despite everything, he was my brother. I never expected anything in return, certainly not for him to defend me against our father. "For 32 years, Charles, you've told Clara she wasn't enough. Too sensitive, too artistic, too different from the path you prescribed. You've withheld affection, weaponized your approval, and tonight you've attempted to humiliate her in front of everyone who matters to you." Ethan looked around the room, addressing the guests directly now. "But here's what you should know about family. Real family doesn't require performance reviews. Real family doesn't measure love and achievements. Real family sees you, supports you, and stands with you even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." My father tried to find his voice. "You have no right to speak this way in front of my colleagues and friends. You don't know anything about our family." "I know enough," Ethan replied. "I know that a man who publicly rejects his daughter at his retirement dinner isn't celebrating a legacy, he's revealing its bankruptcy." The room was so silent, I could hear the ice shifting in water glasses. "Clara is the strongest person I know," Ethan said, his eyes softening as he looked at me, "not because she met her father's impossible standards, but because she survived them and became herself anyway." He raised his water glass one final time, turning back to my father. "So, thank you, Charles Kingston, for showing us exactly the kind of parent we'll never be." With that, Ethan set down his glass and gently took my hand. The warmth of his fingers around mine anchored me as the room spun with shock, embarrassment, and a strange, unidentifiable sense of liberation. Together we walked toward the exit, our footsteps echoing on the marble floor. No one tried to stop us. No one spoke. The collective breath-holding of 70 stunned guests created a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. As we neared the doors, my father found his voice again. "If you walk out now, don't ever come back," he shouted, desperation creeping into his anger. "You're cut off, both of you. Do you understand?" We didn't slow, didn't turn. Ethan's hand remained steady in mine. As we passed the last table, an elderly man I recognized as one of my father's longest-serving colleagues caught my eye. Almost imperceptibly, he nodded. A small gesture of respect, or perhaps solidarity, the first time anyone from my father's world had acknowledged me as something other than a disappointment. The doors closed behind us, muffling the explosion of conversation that erupted in our wake. The valet, having overheard the commotion, avoided eye contact as he hurried to retrieve our car. The night air hit my flushed face like a blessing, cool and clean after the suffocating tension of the banquet hall. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle in the darkness of the car. "I wasn't," I said honestly. I was shattered, humiliated, and strangely, impossibly relieved. Something that had been coiled tightly within me for decades had finally snapped, leaving me raw, but somehow lighter. We drove home in silence, leaving behind the wreckage of expectations and pretense. The emotional dam broke as soon as we entered our apartment. I collapsed onto our couch, violent sobs tearing through me as 3 decades of suppressed pain erupted at once. Ethan held me without speaking, his shirt growing damp with my tears, his arms steady around my shaking shoulders. "I'm sorry," I gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry you had to do that." "I'm not," Ethan said firmly. I've wanted to say those things to your father for 3 years. He'll never forgive us. The thought brought fresh tears. Despite everything, some childish part of me had never stopped hoping for reconciliation. That's his loss, Ethan said. And honestly, Clara, his forgiveness isn't worth having. We stayed up until 3 a.m. talking, the initial shock giving way to a complex mix of emotions. Grief for the relationship I'd never have with my father, anger at his cruelty, fear about family repercussions, and underneath it all, a tentative sense of liberation. Victoria texted me, blaming me, but then Marcus called. "That was quite a show last night," he said, his tone unreadable. When I confirmed the apartment money, he hesitated. "I never thanked you properly for that, and I should have. Listen, what Dad did last night, it wasn't right. I've never seen him like that." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to solidarity Marcus had offered in years. On Thursday, the doorbell rang. Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, came to visit. "What my brother did was unforgivable," she said plainly. "I've been enabling Charles's behavior for years." She handed me an envelope containing old family photographs I'd never seen. My father, laughing, patiently teaching me to fish. "He wasn't always like this," Aunt Margaret said softly. "After your mother got sick the first time, he became obsessed with control. It didn't excuse him, but it gave me a different insight into his fear. 5 days after the dinner, a severe panic attack hit when I saw my father's name on my caller ID. Ethan researched therapists specializing in family trauma. "You need professional support," he said. I chose Dr. Evelyn Reed, and my first appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. "You're not damaged, Clara. You're hurt," Ethan said, pulling me close. "Sometimes things need to break open before they can heal properly." A week after the dinner, my father appeared unannounced at the apartment. "I've come to clear the air," he announced. "That scene was unacceptable." "You told me to leave in front of everyone," I reminded him. "What did you think would happen?" "I expected you to respect my wishes. Instead, your husband created a spectacle that undermined my entire career. Celebration." "Did you come here to apologize?" I asked. He looked genuinely confused. "Apologize for what? For being honest about my disappointment? I've given you every opportunity to make something of yourself, and you've rejected them all." In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what Ethan had been telling me for years. My father was incapable of seeing me as I actually was. He could only see the ways I failed to be who he wanted. "I think you should go," I said quietly. "I'm not finished," he snapped. "I've spoken with my attorney. If you and Ethan don't make a public apology, you'll both be removed from my will. Is that clear?" The old Clara would have crumbled, agreed to anything, but standing in my own home, with my husband beside me and the life we'd built surrounding us, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "We don't want your money," I said. "We never did. What we wanted was your love, your acceptance. But I'm done trying to earn something that should have been freely given." My father's face hardened. "You'll regret this." "I respect myself now," I said. "That's enough." He stormed out, slamming our door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. One fell, a photo from our wedding day, the frame cracking. "Symbolic," I murmured. The only thing that broke was the frame. "We're still intact." Ethan helped me clean up the shards. That night we discussed if Portland might be a good place for a fresh start. I realized I hadn't apologized for anything all day. It was a small victory, but deeply significant. As we drove west the next morning, I realized I hadn't checked my phone for messages from my father in over a week. It wasn't a conscious decision, just a natural fading of an old habit that no longer served me. The constant ache of his rejection had transformed into something different. Not absence of pain, but presence of self-respect. Portland welcomed us with a week of unseasonable sunshine, as if affirming our decision as we unpacked boxes in our new home. I found the cracked wedding picture frame from the night of my father's final visit. I'd kept the frame but replaced the glass. "I think this belongs here," I said, placing it on the mantel of our new living room, a reminder of what we brought with us and what we left behind. Ethan smiled, understanding perfectly. "The past made us who we are," he said, "but it doesn't get to decide who we become." Life in Portland quickly flourished. My verse-bound press thrived in the city's vibrant literary community, even winning a Small Business Innovation Award for our community outreach programs. My therapy sessions with Dr. Evelyn Reed had transitioned from weekly to monthly check-ins. I learned to recognize my self-worth, separate from my father's approval. My relationship with Marcus continued to improve. He called regularly, sharing that he, too, had started therapy to cope with our father's expectations. Aunt Margaret also flew out to visit, finally prioritizing her own values over traditional family harmony, a freedom I admired in her. 2 weeks later, while visiting a friend in the hospital, I unexpectedly ran into my father. He looked older, thinner, one side of his face slightly drooping from the stroke Marcus had mentioned. "Clara," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I'm pregnant, due in November." I smiled. "Congratulations." A silence stretched between us. He didn't apologize, and I no longer waited for one. "I think I should go," I said finally, my heart no longer racing, my vision no longer tunneling. 1 year after my father's retirement dinner, I stood in our Portland kitchen, cradling a glass of sparkling cider. Outside, Ethan was grilling on our back deck, surrounded by our new friends and chosen family. Spring sunshine filtered through cherry blossoms dappling our yard. Life here was filled with support and love, a world entirely different from anything I had ever known. I was 4 months pregnant with our first child. In late November, our daughter Lily Eleanor Hayes was born after 20 hours of labor. Holding her for the first time, I was overwhelmed by a love so fierce and unconditional it brought tears to my eyes. I looked at her peaceful face and made a silent promise. She would grow up knowing she was enough, exactly as she was. Her worth would never be tied to achievements or conformity to someone else's vision. She would be loved for her authentic self, whatever shape that took. Marcus flew in to meet his niece. He awkwardly cradled her, observing, "She has Mom's eyes." He also told me he'd informed Dad about Lily and Charles had asked to see a picture. I nodded, neither encouraged nor distressed. My father was now a peripheral figure in my story. That Christmas, we held a small dinner for our chosen family. Ethan raised his glass. "To family," he said simply. "Not just the one we're born into, but the one we create through love and choice." "To family," everyone echoed, glasses raised. Looking around at these people who accepted me completely, who saw my strengths and weaknesses and loved me anyway, I finally understood the lesson of that painful retirement dinner a 1.5 years ago. What had seemed like an ending, the final rejection by my father, had actually been a beginning. By standing up and walking out with Ethan that night, I had taken the first step toward finding my true home. I had found my way to a truth that had eluded me for 32 years. I was enough. I had always been enough. This was my legacy now, not my father's disappointment, but my daughter's future. The freedom I found was not the absence of past wounds, but the presence of self-respect. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is walk away from what hurts us toward what helps us heal.